Good morning, Tashi Delay.
Good morning. Thank you, Gen Namgyel-la, for making the time for this discussion to help us understand more fully about taking the Bodhisattva vows. Shall we just dive right in?
Well, I thought maybe we'll start with refuge
All right.
and setting the motivation for what we're about to do. Sangye Charan, Sangye Charan, La Janja Badu Dani Gyaptachi, Dagi Jenzagi Besonagi, Drola Panja Sangye Drapa Shaw. Sangye Charan, Sangye Charan, La Janja Badu Dani Gyaptachi, Dagi Jenzagi Besonagi, Drola Panja Sangye Drapa Shaw. Sangye Charan, Sangye Charan, La Janja Badu Dani Gyaptachi, Dagi Jenzagi Besonagi, Drola Panja Sangye Drapa Shaw. With the motivation of bodhicitta, we must liberate all sentient beings from their suffering as quickly as possible. I will do it by myself alone. There are countless sentient beings. I'm alone. But if I become Buddha, then I have the power and the ability to liberate those countless sentient beings that I have karmic connection with. Okay, let's dive in, Lillian.
Okay, thank you. So I was thinking about it. There's a saying about how we travel, that we can take a bicycle or we could take a Ferrari, or maybe it's a bicycle or a jet plane. Can this idea be applied to taking the vows?
I'm wondering if you don't take the vows at all, are you actually moving in a positive direction, or are you even going backwards or standing still? So, not taking refuge, not taking Bodhisattva vows or Tantric vows, whichever vows you're considering, perhaps not taking anything is, I'm trying to think of what I want to say, is like being stuck in samsara. So you're taking refuge in samsara and the pleasures and happinesses of samsara, and through that, creating more and more non-virtue, and maybe even going backwards rather than going forwards. So then you can ask the question, how do you want to go forwards? So from that position of being stuck, then anything seems difficult because you've got to pull your feet out of the mud of samsara and start to move in the positive direction that you've decided. I mean, you have to receive inspiration from somewhere, right? You go to a monastery and you see the statues, or you're on the internet and you see some statues on an altar, or you hear a teaching, and it triggers that virtuous karma. And then you think, I want to start moving in the positive direction. So if you take refuge, that means you become Buddhist. You can apply the label Buddhist. If you haven't taken refuge, then you can't say you're Buddhist. You actually have to formally take refuge for that. When you take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, you're declaring yourself. You're saying, I want to move in that positive direction. I really value and appreciate and respect what Buddha did. And I think in the beginning, we only know a tiny bit of what he did. But even that's inspiring, because in relation to samsara, then it seems so incredible in the face of adversity to have that positive mind and to use adversity in a positive way. So Buddha, Dharma, what he taught, the 84,000 teachings, all of those can be applied by us. But we need help. You can't just read a book and know how to apply it. Then we need to have help to apply it. So Sangha is all the beings around you in Buddhism. There's ordinary beings and there's Arya beings, so higher level beings, and then ordinary beings on the same sort of level as you, but doing their best to become enlightened. They support you. So the analogy is the doctors and the nurses in the hospital. You need the diagnosis so you can get better quickly. So that's the higher level beings help you with the diagnosis. Then the nurses, those around you, they support you and they're holding you and they're lifting you and saying, you can do it, because I started out the same way as you started out, and it was difficult for me, but now I've improved, now I'm able to do blah, 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 So in their own way, they become also like a mini teacher. They're helping you to move in a positive direction. So that would be like a bicycle. You're now moving. You're not with your feet in the mud. You're moving forward, but it's slow. You're going to get there eventually. If you're going from Australia to, I don't know, Finland, you get there eventually, maybe, but it's very slow. The tires may break and, things go wrong. And then if you want to go quicker, then you take more vows, because now you've decided, yes, sentient beings are suffering. I want to help. I want to be a benefit as quickly as possible. So then you take the Bodhisattva vows. And there's two levels of the Bodhisattva vows. One level is wishing. So I hear about the Bodhisattva vows and I wish I could keep them, even though they're not that difficult to keep and you can easily purify them. But still, some people are afraid or hesitant about taking those vows because they haven't taken vows before. Refuge was the first that they took. And then Bodhisattva vows, it seems daunting. How can I become a Bodhisattva? And I think this is a confrontation with low self-esteem, low self-confidence. How could I do it? Poor me. So you have to come up, your energy has to come up and you have to be determined. I'm going to do it, but I need to do it as quickly as possible. But on the other hand, so what if, and the mind goes backwards and forwards. So it's very clever. There's wishing. I wish I could go to somewhere, say I go to a travel agent. I wish I could go to New Zealand, but I can't at the moment. So I investigate and I make a promise. When I'm ready, I'm going to be able to go. So that's wishing bodhicitta. And then there's engaging bodhicitta, where you actually take the vows. And they're very easy to purify. You just recite a verse every day to remind you of bodhicitta. And then this is like you're now moving at a much greater speed. So you can say it would be like flying or a very fast sports car, a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or something like this. So you're now moving at a very fast speed. Because of the vows that you've taken, 24 hours a day, they're purifying and accumulating merit. Without the vows, then if I make a promise, like New Year, I make a promise, from now on, I'm going to exercise every day for half an hour. And January the 1st, I do, 2nd, I do, 3rd, I start thinking, oh, this is too much trouble, it's too hard, I can't be bothered. So on the 3rd, I exercise for 15 minutes, and on the 4th, I decide I've given it up. So, you made a promise, but you didn't keep the promise. With refuge, bodhicitta, you make a promise, and you're very aware of the potential. You're very aware of why you're doing it, that you're doing it for the sake of others. And then the benefit is for me. But only by benefiting others can you truly benefit yourself. So our focus with refuge is first me. What am I doing? How am I doing it? reducing the harmful behavior. And then I start to look outwards and realize I can use my positive behavior, my virtuous behavior, in order to benefit others. And that's when we take on bodhicitta, the path to enlightenment. Does that help?
That's great. Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. But when I look through the listing that you kindly have provided, but all the vows and the description, there seem like there are a lot of vows, and perhaps people who haven't taken them yet, it's a lot to take on in that respect. So how do people take all of these vows? That it just seems there's a lot.
Yeah, I remember when I took on all of these vows, then after a few days, I said to a senior monk, what's the point in taking all these vows if I know I'm going to break some of them? And he said, because you take them, you break them, you purify, then you take them again, you break them, you purify. So in that way, you're laying an instinct, if you like, or imprints on your mind stream of purifying, retaking, purifying, retaking. So over time, the purification becomes stronger than the breaking. And so the positive is becoming deeper and deeper, and the negative is becoming less and less because you're purifying over time. So I think we need to see it as an advantage. But, you know, when you look at 18, 46, 100, 200, whatever, you need to take one or two, maybe each day, and think about that one or those two, and really try to put them into practice, because this is the Bodhisattva's behavior. It's not some sort of whimsical, I think we'll make this a vow. I think we'll make this a vow. It's actually the Bodhisattva's way of life. So if you take the first two in one day, and can I keep those two and thinking about them during the day, and maybe keeping a journal or a diary as to what's happening in relation to those two. And then the next day, another two, and keep going like that. And then over time, it means that you're going to know what the vows are, and you're going to know whether you're keeping them easily, whether they're difficult to keep. And there's some surprising ones in there too. Like, you know, somebody invites you for dinner, you should go for dinner. So you might think, here I am sitting in my room doing my meditation. I'm a great bodhisattva. I never go out. I don't mix with people. My meditation is great. But in the Bodhisattva vows, it says, hang on a minute, there's sentient beings, you know, and you've improved yourself, but how's your improvement helping others? So then, you know, I think sometimes you need this surprise, you know, and the surprise comes in the Bodhisattva vows, where it tells you sometimes the opposite of what you would think is virtuous behavior. You might think sitting at home alone is virtuous behavior, but actually, if you've improved, if your mind is better, you should go and meet people. You should have something to do with others, because that affects them and it helps them. And it also helps you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, that's great. And I wonder, would there be any times when we would need to confess our downfalls, our mistakes in relation to the vows to the Lama with whom we took the vows?
I think you know what Lama Atisha said is that if you take the refuge vows, then you take them for life, and they're more difficult to keep because, for instance, not killing, not stealing, not lying, you know, these things can come up in daily life, but not killing is not killing a human being. Not stealing is an object of value, which would be, say over $80, $100. So there's a practicality to it. It's not saying, every little thing that you've taken by mistake, then you're going to have to beat yourself up and feel terrible about it. There is a practicality, but on the other hand, you need to be aware of when you've actually broken the vow. And in the Refuge booklet, it's very clear on how you've broken when and how you've broken the vow, which way you've broken the vow. You have to have the motivation, first of all, to break the vow. So if you're aware that you really have broken refuge vow, then you can't just retake it by yourself. It needs to be repaired. So then you need to go to your teacher and confess to them, and they're going to go, I warned you. The finger comes out, right? It happens to so many people. I think that something is broken, especially when we're new, when we're beginners. It's easy to break. So then that's when you need your teacher to help you, to purify, somebody to talk to confess to, and then you can retake. Sometimes people think they can go to a second refuge ceremony without breaking their vows. Say, for instance, they took 5 vows. Then they go to a second refuge ceremony and take 3 vows and think they've cut out 2. You can't do that either. So you have to take not killing, but the others are a choice. With Bodhisattva vows, you can take wishing, which means in the future. And by the way, Bodhisattva vows don't finish when you pass away, when you die. They continue on from life after life after life. So in some point in the future, may not be in this life, that seed will ripen into you being able to take the Bodhisattva vows. And the Bodhisattva vows, you can purify by yourself. There's 2 verses or 3 verses that you can recite in front of your altar, and anything that's been broken or there's some sort of infraction, you can purify by yourself. But if you're really disturbed by some sort of behavior, then you can go back to your teacher and say, this is very disturbing. I don't like the way I'm behaving, or I'm not sure I quite understand what I'm supposed to do. And you get some help.
Thank you. Now I'm wondering, are there any personal experiences with vows that you've had that you could perhaps tell us about?
Well, this is very personal, Lillian. Well, as I said, when I went to the monastery, I wasn't Buddhist. And at the end of the 4 weeks, they offered refuge, bodhicitta, bodhisattva vows, tantric vows, and some people became monks and nuns. So I took refuge with 5 vows, which is the sort of, you can say, the best refuge, because the 5 vows are protecting your refuge. Not saying anything less than that is no good, but my understanding of it was, if you really want to improve your situation, you take the 5 vows, including not drinking, no intoxicants. So I thought I was going back to the West, and how easy or difficult was it going to be not drinking, because especially in Australia or England, it's a social thing, people get together and you say, oh, I don't drink. And they go, well, what are you, weird, something strange? So I took the 5 vows, and then I took the Bodhisattva vows. So now we're up to going on for 60, 50 odd, 60. And then I took the Tantric vows, the highest Tantric vows, which you don't know before you take them. You're not allowed to study them. You're not allowed to know about them. And when I asked somebody once, why is that? They said, well, if you knew about it, you'd never do it. It's so difficult. So I took tantric vows. So now we're up to maybe nearly 500. And then I became a monk. And at that time, it was 36 vows. So I ended up with, 550, 600 vows, having never taken vows in my life at the end of this 4-week course. And a lot of stuff came up, a lot of purification, because once you've taken the vows, 24 hours a day, you're purifying, but you're also accumulating. So now I went from stuck in the mud of samsara to the Lamborghini or the jet airplane or whatever. And it was like, why are we going so fast? So it was good in one way, and it was very difficult in another way. I mean, I wouldn't recommend many people to do what I did, but my teacher at the time said I should, and so I trusted that that's what I should do. It did bring up health problems, it did bring up many things, but on the other hand, I learned a lot from it. I think that the best way to go about it is really to take refuge and take as many vows as you can, 1 to 5. Well, you have to take 1, but to 5. I don't think stealing, I think you can easily keep that, unless you're a kleptomaniac. Lying, difficult in society. And there's white lies and there's spiritual lies. What breaks the vow is the spiritual lie. You're a Bodhisattva? Oh, of course I am. You're Buddha? Of course I am. But you're not. So that type of lie is what breaks the vow. Intoxicants doesn't really break the vow, but it harms the vow. Because if you get drunk, you can break all the other vows. You think, I'm drunk, I can drive a car, and then you hit somebody, etc., etc. Terrible things can happen when you're drunk or using drugs. So that's why the intoxicant vow is there, to protect the other vows, because Buddha said intoxicants really affect the mind. And intoxicants also is the opposite to wisdom, right? It promotes ignorance. So a little glass of wine, okay. But if you're constantly getting drunk, now we know it's affecting the brain, the liver, the kidneys, everything, So often it's said a small glass of wine is okay, but can you stop? If it's just one little glass of wine, you think, that was delicious. I'll just have a little bit more. And then before you know it, you've lost your ability to discriminate whether you should stop or not. So I think taking 600 vows is maybe a crazy idea, but taking refuge is very possible. To me, it doesn't seem contradictory to ordinary life. In fact, it seems to make you into a better person in relationships, in business, or whatever you're doing. And then the Bodhisattva vows, like I said, you can break them quite easily, but you can also repair them very easily. And so if you've decided to be on the Mahayana Bodhisattva path, sooner or later you have to take them, because you want to move in that direction of bodhicitta and enlightenment. Tantric vows, there's different levels of Tantra. There's 4 levels of Tantra. I took the very highest one, Anuttara Yoga Tantra. It's got the most vows. It's the most difficult. But there's also lower Tantra, which is much easier and is more like a blessing, is more like an opening into a practice. And so you have to be aware of what you're doing. You have to be aware of what you're taking, and you have to be aware of what you need to do if you break it or you harm it. So if you're not sure, ask your teacher before you do it. Don't do it and then ask afterwards, now what do I do? Now it's a bit late. You've taken it, and now you have to keep it. So I think go step by step, take refuge, see how you go. Then if you're still unsure, take wishing bodhicitta, and then see how you go. And then study the Bodhisattva vows. If you don't think they're so difficult, take them. Like that.
Oh, a lot of really helpful information. Thank you so much, Gen
Oh,
Namgyel-la.
yes.
And is there anything more you'd like to add? Help us understand or implement the vows or prepare to take them?
I think you have to become aware of what you are affiliating yourself with. Whether your life is affiliated with samsara, the source and the cause of our suffering. We have human body, so we're born. We have aging, sickness, death. So aging is a suffering. Milarepa said if we aged in one day, we wouldn't be able to tolerate the pain. Birth is terrible suffering, but we don't remember, but the suffering's there. Death, unless we know what to do, is a suffering. So as human beings, we have those four sufferings in common. All of us have those sufferings, whether we want them or not. So Buddha first taught the noble truth of suffering. And people think, oh, it's a bit bleak and, not a happy path. But unless you confront your suffering, then you can't really have happiness. It would be like having a really serious illness and denying that illness and pretending as if there's nothing wrong and going out drinking and dancing every night and, going crazy. But actually you've got this terrible sickness that's killing you and you're not addressing it. It could be cured. There is a cure for it, for this terrible illness that you've got, but you're denying it. I'm not sick, so therefore you can't get better. So samsara, I think, has to be investigated because we very much believe if there's chocolate, if there's coffee, if there's a relationship, if there's a good job with lots of money, if I have a nice house to live, I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm having a good life. But we're not looking at the underlying sickness. That this is a samsaric body which is inevitably aging, inevitably going to get sick, and inevitably going to pass away. And all the non-virtue that you accumulate by trying to achieve the happiness in samsara continues on with you. We pack it in our baggage and we go off to the next life. And then the next life can be even more suffering than this life. And we wonder why me? It's not fair. I'm a good person. Why are all these bad things happening to me? Because we never address the actual situation of suffering. So I think the first thing we need to do is look at suffering and why we're suffering. And do we want to suffer? Do we want to continue suffering? And this is why I started thinking about discussing Chur, because Chur is leaning into the pain and the suffering. And in samsara, we want to lean back. The suffering's there, right? So we can lean into it and deal with it and transform it and do something with it to make our spiritual practice stronger. Or if we're samsaric beings, we lean back, or ordinary beings, we lean back and say, I don't like this. This is suffering. I don't like it. I don't want it. And so we try to get away from it. But in the trying to get away from it, it increases the pain and the suffering. So I think You know, my advice is do what you can in order to benefit others. At least be kind, even if you're not taking vows or whatever. You just like studying the Dharma, that's fine. But at least be kind, be considerate to others. And I think as much as you can, um, use the suffering of samsara to be fuel in order to develop and create more compassion and more love. Because otherwise, the suffering of samsara can get you down, can pull you down, you know, and you start to think, what's it worth? You know, why am I living? What's the purpose of living? Why am I here? But if you have sufferings and you transform them into energy for compassion, then there's your purpose for living, because compassion is in relation to yourself and others. Love is in relation to yourself and others. Wisdom, relation to myself and others. So I'm not saying deny yourself, but I am saying have a bigger purpose, not just me, but me and you. You know, we're in this together. We're interdependent, and we need to be in this together rather than thinking I'm in this, you know, and I've got nothing to do with you. Very much we have something to do with you. We are connected. Where do we get our food? Where do we get our clothes? Where do we get our buildings? Everything is interconnected. So we need to have that mental connection, and then we need to have an actual connection. Go out and benefit sentient beings if you can. But the main thing, how to start, is have kind thoughts. Rejoice, you know, in the goodness that others are doing. Be happy that we're in such a position that we have Dharma, the Dharma still exists in its entirety, because in future, bits of it won't exist. It will have disappeared, and then there's just buildings, and there's no Dharma. So right now, we still have Dharma. But how many people come to teachings? Few, in comparison to 9 billion sentient beings, 9 billion human beings. Few come to teachings. So it's up to those few to develop that power and that energy to help others to enlightenment, I think.
Beautiful note on which to finish this lovely interview. Thank you so very much, Genla. And please
Welcome.
keep well and live long for us, please.
I do my best.
Mm.
Thank you very much, Lillian.
Pleasure.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.